the third doorway in your book, Seven Doorways to Self-Discovery, Internal Power, Seven Doorways to Self-Discovery, is about positive thinking. And positive thinking is an interesting one, I think, because we all see books on positive thinking, you know, how to grow rich by positive thinking, and how to get your ideal relationship, and all sorts of things, perhaps more in the external world, how to achieve your dreams and desires. But I think what I'm expecting you're going to be talking about is how to achieve something which is more inward, more inner potential, because we are talking about self-discovery here. So I wonder if you could take it up just on that particular line to begin with. Let's see where we go with it.
Sure. Well, we obviously have started this self-discovery journey by recognizing that we have an inner impulse to kind of begin to look within ourselves and our personal potential, our personal power, from this external focus where we tend to be very materially oriented, very much, you know, seeking fame, fortune, good feelings in our outer world, whether that's through, you know, material manifestations, relationships, experiences, adventures, a whole myriad of ways that we go out into life, you know, trying to feel something that makes us somehow feel good or feel better on a regular basis. This inner shift, this self-discovery shift, takes our focus from the external world more into the internal world. And as we've already discovered and discussed, the idea that, you know, once we begin this journey, we start to realize we have choice in our perspectives. We have choice in the way we think and the way we feel, and we can actually change our perspectives, our attitudes, our relationships with the interconnections of beliefs, past experiences, remembrances, memories, and also through our imagination and the creation of things that we want to experience in the world. This is all part of that inner communication that we spoke of in the second doorway, where we explored more of how we communicate with ourselves, and then in that communication process, how we also communicate in the world. The next piece that we explore in this self-discovery process, and not necessarily linearly, because these all kind of happen simultaneously, and we keep getting greater and greater and larger perspectives with our self-discovery process. But positive thinking becomes a natural recognition of our innate potential to release limiting thoughts, release limiting feelings, release old baggages, traditions, rituals, things that have conditioned us a certain way, begin to look at life with fewer constraints and fewer obstacles to our potential, fewer ways of looking at life from standpoints where we're, you know, thinking in terms of the way it has been and that's the way it will be. Positive thinking comes into play as an internal mechanism where we start to recognize the difference between what we call positive thinking, positive energy, negative thinking, negative energy. These are very broad labels. All of these that we will talk about in the self-discovery process are very broad, and everyone will have, you know, some kind of an imprint of their own personal definition. You know, positive, negative is often almost immediately culturally considered good and bad, or right and wrong. And yet, what we're working on here in the self-discovery process is to expand our understanding, to recognize the energies innate with our experiences internally and externally. So positive thinking in this understanding isn't just about looking at something saying, well, we're going to look at life positive in such a way that we're just going to pretend that everything's rosy, everything's perfect, everything's wonderful. We're looking at it much deeper. We're looking at it much more as a facet of the very nature of who we are. So the explanation that comes out of this is to recognize that negative and positive energies aren't good or bad, right or wrong, that they are simply energies that either empower us or draw our energy down. And that's the quickest way, because we will all understand that energetic response. You know, generically labeling or universally labeling something as a negative energy or as a negative thought or as a negative feeling, if we get past this conditioning that says it's bad or wrong and simply look at negative energy as a place where we're letting our energy leak out, we're suppressing our potential, we're limiting the way we see ourselves, we're draining ourselves of our own energy. And we can look at the typical negative energy words: hate, anger, frustration, guilt, worry, shame. Any of these energies, they tend to take away our personal power, our inner power. And we tend to often give it away naturally when we get into these states. Rightly understood, negative energy isn't a bad or wrong energy. In fact, what it helps us understand is the contrast of how to move our energy higher and in a more unlimited fashion. Because a lot of these negative energy components that we have experienced and do experience are really because they've been aspects of our limited observations and our limited understandings from childhood on. We've taken them on as suggestions and experiences of others. We've taken on other people's anger, for example, when it really wasn't ours, but we were so young we didn't know differently. So we thought their anger was our anger, and their anger caused our anger to trigger. And and lo and behold, we create experiences and memories and past thought forms that have this negative, draining energy associated to it. Yet in the self-discovery process, the beauty of this self-discovery process is now we have something within which to understand that all of this energy that we have held on to, all of this energy that we continue to recreate in our lives that doesn't empower us, can in fact be shifted, transmuted, changed into a very more open, universal energy of positive potential. Athletes use this quite frequently, very specifically, when they are striving to achieve some goal of athletic prowess. They will use visualization and positive thinking and positive recognition and positive affirmation as a way to stimulate and strengthen their abilities. Somewhat externally oriented, and yet there's still an internal component going on because they're striving to be better than they were the previous time. So we have indications. We see this in the business world. We see this in various in music and so many different places where there is always this kind of component going on. The challenge has been we're mostly unconscious of it, and the self-discovery process is being able to turn within and be more conscious of the types of energies we entertain in our experience every moment of every day. And is that the experience we truly want to have? Or can we, or will we, do we choose to actually expand our potential, expand our experiences, our understandings? And all that starts with the process of beginning to let go of limitation and open up to more unlimited approaches to life. That's how I would explain more of the positive thinking. It's this internal process that as we shift and change our inner acceptance of self, our inner worth of self, our inner recognition of our true potential, that we actually then bring together more of our inner world, and then naturally we begin to have a more correct relationship with people, places, and things in the outer world, because we're no longer filtering it based on our negative presentation. We're now opened up to our relationship with money, for example. Now it's not about positive thinking into having the greatest amount of money or greatest amount of fame or the greatest fortune or the perfect relationships. We're having such a wonderful relationship with ourselves that it naturally permeates every other aspect, and these outer experiences come as a natural result of our inner shifts and changes in our wisdom and our understanding.
Well, it seems that part of the process is becoming aware of your own limited thinking, your own negative thinking, the things that you've carried with you for years and years and years. But then isn't it a matter of having to deal with those specifically? I mean, you did say that you can't just sort of pretend that everything's all right. And you have to be realistic about the way your life is, don't you? I mean, but do you have to deal with these limited thoughts specifically?
Initially, in the self-discovery process, we will most probably look at very large, specific things. I've mentioned before, like my own unfolding, that there were once I started to go within, I recognized big chunks of my life, big boulders I called them, where it's like, wow, that's a big piece that, big piece of shame or big piece of inner criticism or big piece of guilt. And I faced them, a big fear. Like there were some extraordinary things in the self-discovery process initially where things that I was unknown. I did not realize I was afraid of doing certain things because I had all this fear built up that I wasn't really recognizing, that I wasn't necessarily taking bold, courageous steps in my life because I was unsure of the future, so I thought. And in reality, what I was doing is I was replaying all the potentials of all the experiences, myself and other people, that I'd accumulated. And I thought that, well, if I take that risk or if I take that choice, all these things can happen. Well, it was very unconscious. The moment I started to turn within and started to face these things and started to say, well, okay, I am thinking this, I am feeling this. Is this really how I think and how I feel? Or is there actually a part of me that is grander, wiser, and more okay with, each of these pieces, each of these aspects, whether it was fear or guilt or shame? And literally, in a very rapid form, I was able to just turn around and face these things that had been ruling me rather unconsciously and say, well, I have a choice here. I can continue on feeling shame, feeling guilt, feeling fear, feeling doubt, worried about all these types of things in life, or I can simply take charge of my life, recognize my own inner potential, and explore my own inner potential from the standpoint that whatever I dream, whatever I hope for, I can create. Whatever I choose to be, I can become. And literally, in that process, things begin to fall away because I'm facing them. When we face our fears, they tend not to be so fearful. It's when we're running from our fears that they tend to have control over us. I often use the example, even from a fear standpoint, we may be out walking in our neighborhood and we see a rather large dog that seems seemingly vicious and barking, perhaps, and the first energetic response is, oh my God, what's going to happen? Is that dog going to come over and run up and bite me? And then fear runs, that adrenaline kicks in, that the physiological chemical reaction takes place, and all these experiences flood through our being in that moment, wondering, what's next? Well, fear is a great assistance in a way to help us recognize potentials, and certainly the grand spectrum of potentials. However, we're so conditioned in so many ways to take the odd story here and there of 1 in 1 million people that get bitten. So then we assume if it's happened once, it can happen to us. And in fact, if we look at the experience, it looks like we are actually, in imminent danger. Or in fact, if we can be more present, take a deep breath and recognize, okay, thank you, fear. Thank you, experience. Thank you for coming up, showing me this. There's so many other potentials that can happen. There is not a singular ravenous, vicious dog comes up and bites me. That is a very singular experience. It doesn't mean it has to be the experience that happens. Many things can happen. By our calmness, the dog can, instantly become calm. The owner can step out of the door, having heard the barking, and call the dog back. There's so many things that can happen that can be different than that initial experience. And yet, how many of us have walked through life literally being ruled from one fear and one doubt to the next? One guilt, one shame to the next, one anger, one hatred to the next. This whole self-discovery process is saying, okay, we need to recognize that this is how we've allowed ourselves to be conditioned. By taking back personal responsibility, we also can recognize that we have far more potential than these so-called negative energies, very generically leveled. They have served us. They served us to get here. However, the self-discovery process is about reclaiming our internal power, recognizing that we can move forward in a much more positive way. And that positive way is not so much about saying, oh, everything's rosy, everything's fine, everything's beautiful. It's about recognizing that if I approach every moment of every day and I stay present, I'm physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually present, as we've talked about. If I release all of the things that bind me to an old way of looking at life or experiencing life, then I'm actually open to a much broader, more rich experience, and I have choice. I have choice to look at life from a more unlimited perspective. And that's where positive thinking as an energy allows us to recognize that positive affirmation, recognizing that, yes, I do have unlimited potential. That's a very powerful, positive affirmation that we can use, but we have to actually feel it. We actually have to recognize, we have to understand it, and the way we understand it is by understanding the interplay of these negative and positive energies that we have allowed in our life. And what we're really looking to do is not about just making, wispy, hopeful, positive confirmations of what we want or what we think we want, but being very genuine about the fact that we are powerful creative beings. We do have choice. We can create things that we've never imagined before, just by the power of our imagination. We can achieve and accomplish things, but this is on a much more intrinsic level. It's not just about pursuing goals. It's not about pursuing any one thing. It's about being a more powerful, potent, positive energy.
So with the negative things, that's kind of going to be a long-term thing, where if you come to recognize that there's something in your mind or feelings that's of a negative thing, then you can bring it to awareness sufficiently to be able to deal with it there and then, or check it as something you're going to deal with. But right now, we could take a more positive approach to our day-to-day life, you're saying. So presumably that means being aware, being present, I think, as you're saying, with a much more positive approach than perhaps we might have had in the past, seeing what is good, seeing what we enjoy, seeing where we see great potential, and we can do that straight away.
Yes, in fact, we could actually almost create the parallel relationship. How we can do this more actively and proactively is that in the present moment, when we go within, as we've discussed, going in and paying attention to the way we think, the way we feel, our inner critic, our inner hopeful dreamer, if we can look at positive, negative energy in the terms of limited and unlimited, that is something that we can all relate to. And something that we consider, unlimited in this moment might be even more unlimited tomorrow because of our release of the limitations. We might think we're capable of so much right now, and yet tomorrow, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, if we continue this process, we might open ourselves up to even more unlimited potential than we really gave ourselves credit for or recognized, in this present moment. And certainly that's been, a great part of my journey, is that when I started doing many of these things, I never intended to or had any awareness that I was capable of writing books, for example. I did not see myself as a writer or even one that was, worthy of constructing a halfway decent sentence. And yet, by recognizing that I had unlimited potential and I was becoming aware of things that I wanted to convey out into the world, the more I became okay with myself, the more I just sat down and started writing. I did not know whether I had this ability or not. I simply was willing to try it out. Well, sure enough, as I get through this process more and more, I found that I could actually write fairly well. Then I found that I was actually writing quite well, and I could convey my understandings in a very simple and easy form that many people could, reach and be reached by and actually understand. So I found, that by pursuing what had previously been a very unconscious limitation in my world, by letting it go, I opened up more and more. So then books became, presenting myself out in a public way through workshops and seminars, and then that turned into being able to go onto TV and do the same material in a TV format before a universal audience. And in each case, I had no prior training, experience, recognition, acknowledgement, allowance of any of these possibilities to manifest. And yet, with the self-discovery process, by going in and actually recognizing that I had unlimited potential, then I was able to pursue my life with fewer and fewer limitations and more of an unlimited approach. Does it take a very long time? Well, as we've discussed with the whole self-discovery process, there really is no beginning and no end. So the idea that, it takes a long time to get to some level is really misplacing kind of the understanding of self-discovery. It's like we're discovering ourselves today one way, Tomorrow we'll discover more about ourselves differently in another way. And 20 years down the road, we'll still be discovering parts of ourselves, limitations, little, wispy here and there, things that have held us back. The journey is more fruitful and more interesting, and I would dare say more exciting when we start to discover ourselves, because now we find all this hidden potential that we never gave ourselves a chance to even acknowledge. And it affects everything and everyone around us. Certainly, I know when I embarked on self-discovery, it changed just about every aspect of my life almost overnight. I mean, from the inner awakenings, the inner recognitions, the inner explorations, to the outer manifestations, there was quite a bit of change that happened rapidly within my life. That eventually stabilized, and that also gave me the chance to be on, kind of, as we've used the metaphor before, of a old train coming into a train house and a new train leaving. The old one, the old limiting self, the old negative self, the old aspects of us that are unempowering, they kind of slow down and eventually come to a stop, while simultaneously we begin to leave the old station on our new train that is of much more empowered, open potential, and probably not even on a track anymore. Because in fact, one of the beauties of self-discovery is that, where I had been, my life was pretty much orchestrated in my mind as to what was next. I could pretty much look out over to my life and say, well, I'll do this, that, and the other, and at this age, that will have been the end of it. I'll retire and pass on. When I changed over from this very limited way of thinking to a much more open, unlimited, became very multidimensional, and I've done things that I could never have, absolutely would have never considered as possible as part of my life. They weren't even dreams. They weren't even hopes or things that I could have entertained in my mind, because they were too far-fetched. They were too way out there. And yet, by going into this more unlimited, by approaching life with joy, by approaching life with the idea that every day is a fresh potential, I've been afforded opportunities that I could never have conceived of prior. So I've learned to be okay with that process. I've been learned to be okay with the fact that every moment of every day is a new beginning. So I'm constantly, in a way, reinventing myself, because I'm keep releasing the experiences, some 2 decades later. Has that been a long time? I really don't recognize time anymore, because for me, I just love the process of finding out more and more of my potential.
So that's something we can start straight away and probably find that it changes us instantly, in a way. I mean, it would certainly change the way that we behave around other people, wouldn't it?
Because we're changing the behavior in ourselves, and we're recognizing, I won't say changing the behavior, we're actually recognizing our behavior, and by observing our negative and positive aspects, our limited and unlimited thinking, we simply begin to choose to open ourselves up to more and more unlimited thinking. In other words, every time we find ourselves with an inner critic, an inner putting ourselves down, or saying that we can't do this or can't do that, or we shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that, we can open ourselves up. And there is a natural responsibility that goes on with this. This isn't about just saying, oh, I'm unlimited, therefore I can do everything and anything, because in fact, that's not what happens. We will come from more and more of an unlimited perspective, and in that we begin to recognize more and more of our interrelationship with everyone and everything around us. We begin to recognize, how the energy of money, because it's not about the physical money, it's about the energy of money, how that affects us through our relationship with it. And that, in fact, the people that we're involved with, our close friends, our spouses, our family, it's not about the actual interactions one to another, it's about our relationship on an energetic standpoint. And we can be involved in all of these experiences we were involved with previously, rather unconsciously. We can open up and be more present, and we can start becoming more observant of ourselves in relationship to these people, places, and things, and learn over time how to simply express ourselves in a more unlimited nature. And then by our expressing ourselves with fewer limitations, angers and hatreds, shames and guilts, worries, these things tend to drop away. So that means we're not engaging in our relationships, for example, with people, with family members. We're not engaging shame the way we did before. We're we're accepting ourselves, we're going to be more accepting of others. So even our relationships will evolve fairly quickly just by recognizing how this energy has affected us in the limiting ways and opening up into a more unlimited fashion. It's an all internal experience that then gets externalized through everything we do.
Mm. Well, being an internal experience then, when we're wondering what is our positive potential, what are the sorts of things we would look at? I mean, we could think, oh, well, the negative things are rather easier to find, perhaps.
Absolutely.
But, you know, when you
and
say,
that's their purpose, because they actually, because we are conditioned with so many of these negative things. That's why I say it's a really, we can look at it as, bad and wrong and mistakes and, things that hold us back, or we can actually look at them for the opportunity that they present. Every time we do limit ourselves, it gives us the contrast, the opportunity to embrace a choice to go more unlimited. So they actually do serve a function, or have served a function. It's just that in the self-discovery process, when we take our attention and draw it more within and recognize our fuller potential, then that negative approach, that grand contrast that we have used, is less and less interesting, because it becomes tiring to recognize, shame and guilt, worry constantly, because we're using energy universally all the time. Mm-hmm. Are we using it to drain away our potential, or are we using it to actually expand our potential? And that's where the process becomes unique unto each individual. Some will be, have much greater personal doubt about their abilities. Others will be genuinely afraid of their abilities, their personal power. Others will be so steeped in shame that they just can't rise out of bed, literally, in days, because they are so allowing their energy just to leak out everywhere, because they're not recognizing their fuller potential. Each person is going to approach this at their own pace, their own way, and they're going to recognize everything that's unique unto them, everything that they've accepted through teachings, trainings, suggestions, emotions, experiences, throughout their entire life. And so many of these do formulate in our childhood, because we're the biggest sponge at that time. We're looking to all the people around us to kind of encourage us, and yet, because, since most people have not been recognizing their personal potential, the encouragement is usually negative. So we usually are reinforcing negative from an early age. And so it's not a surprise that we get ourselves to this point where we are fearful and doubtful, estranged not only from ourselves, but estranged from everybody around us. We tend to have come to such a point of separation from ourselves that we are literally separated from the world, because we don't recognize our own potential. We can't see potential in the world. And, it just is layer upon layer upon layer of beliefs, traditions, suggestions, and the self-discovery process begins to let all that go. It begins to say, okay, this is what got me here. It doesn't matter. This is what got me here. What do I choose to do next? And it will take, it's a level of strength and tenacity and courage for people to explore themselves. And I can't even begin to say how that would work for any one person. I just know how it has worked for myself, and the experiences that have come out of it as a result has created such a passion in me to say, just try it anyway. Work on self from the standpoint of how to let go of the limitations, let go of the inner criticisms, the inner justifications, the inner demands, which are usually focused on external experiences, and just go within and begin to pay attention, observe those thoughts, those feelings, let them pass through and don't attach to them, and then allow new ideas to come in to replace those old ideas. And then those that, do kind of come from the heart, that do kind of attract our attention, that are interesting, that we've never tried before, that, somehow make us feel joy, feel more complete and whole, those are the things to begin to explore and add more of our energy into, and then allow that to unfold. And then we'll find new pieces that will unfold from that. And, it just goes on and on and on. We don't want to limit where this can take us, because why would we? The whole idea is to discover our true nature as love, as creative, as potential. And who here today can say what that looks like down the road? Who would want to? Because that would defeat the very purpose of discovery.
So it'd be good to work out what we feel we might be able to do if we set our minds to it. For example, you said about writing a book, or it could be about doing a painting of some sort, which might be an indication that actually we're much more creative than we thought. Perhaps much more able to do something that takes time and requires us to apply ourselves in a self-responsible kind of way. So in a way, by looking for external things that we might do, we learn more about our inner capabilities. For example, to be creative, to be loving, to be caring, to be compassionate, to be thoughtful, to be capable, some of these more abstract values that it's perhaps easier to find something in the external world that actually indicates that we do have those kinds of abilities, those kinds of potential.
Well, in fact, the next doorway is about creativity. And in that, we actually go into the exploration of how we have limited our understanding of our creative nature. So in the next doorway, we'll kind of blow the top off of the limiting beliefs about creativity and how creativity is a natural aspect of every moment of every day. We are just so conditioned again to see creative natures express themselves in very specific and rather unique ways that we don't recognize how creation is going on in each moment. Mm-hmm. So that is, again, self-discovery and these doorways, they are literally doorways, and here we're, discussing 7 of them. Certainly, by no means are they the only doorways. And in fact, if we think of them just metaphorically as doorways, they're open-ended. We can go into them anytime. We can go into them out of, any particular linear order. We can go in and visit them. We can, leave them for a time and come back at another time. We can literally go through a doorway and never go back because we are so into that exploration of that particular piece. So it's really about expanding our way of looking at life, our way of experiencing life, that positive thinking will by itself will never fulfill us if we don't actually feel and understand and recognize our innate nature of potential. Mm-hmm. So if we don't actually ever feel that it's truly a possibility, say take the weight issue, because that seems to be a very prominent thing with so many, people will do the positive affirmation about wanting to, say, lose weight. And yet, if they're not recognizing their connection to themselves, the things that bring them joy, the things that make them feel healthy in their thoughts and feelings, the positive affirmation might bring very temporary results. But we're not actually recognizing our true potential as an unlimited being, as a healthy, whole, complete being. And it's really a life shift in perspective, not a dietary shift in perspective or a physical body shift in shift. We need to embrace ourselves in our entirety, and when we do that, when we embrace all of it, that then allows us to approach life from a much greater sense of joy and balance and whole and complete recognition. And then weight itself takes care of itself, because now we're looking at life so completely differently. There are countless examples where, the power of positive affirmation, sure, if you do and condition ourselves often enough with a particular idea, then there's a good chance that we will manifest something in a temporary nature, yet will it be fulfilling? And therein lies what, we started out this conversation, as you mentioned, how so much of the positive thinking is based on material manifestation, achieving something. Well, we have to ask the very fundamental question before we ever embark on that positive affirmation. Why? Why am I affirming this? Why am I looking to have, huge sums of money? Or why do I want that perfect relationship? What externally am I trying to achieve so that I can somehow feel better about myself then, once I achieve it? Mm-hmm. This is about self-acceptance right here and right now. Recognizing our potential, embracing our potential, and then unfolding that potential, discovering more and more of that potential all the time. And therefore, all these external things whatever experiences we will be filled with the joy of the potential that we have right now. So the journey becomes the destination and the goal. Self-discovery is a journey. It's not something that has an end goal. We will always discover more of our potential. So this is a very fundamental shift in understanding exactly why I decided to write about it, in the very first book, was because I had read many of these positive thinking books and absolutely agree with the power of positive thinking. I just felt that it was still not recognizing why are we doing it? What's the purpose for positive thinking? What are we trying to achieve in some future reality that if we affirm ourselves will eventually manifest, that we can't actually have, in fact, already have right here and right now. And then whatever we do manifest will just simply be more of an expression of ourselves, will be more joy, because we're discovering more joy. We're discovering more peace. We're discovering more harmony. But it's already in us. It isn't something we achieve in an outer way. It's something that's already within us, and we unfold it in a natural way.
So what would be a couple of examples of affirmations we could make to help to bring this potential out?
Well, certainly we go in, we begin to recognize, and one of the things that I shared early on, I wouldn't say that I necessarily do it so much now, because I end up being more aware and observant of my inner thinking, my inner feeling on a regular, ongoing the way I interrelate with myself. But in those initial states, because I was quite unconscious about all of this, and it was new, and it was interesting and intriguing, and certainly these big boulders were rather overwhelming initially. So what I would do in those first few moments of the self-discovery process is that I would actually start to pay attention to my inner thinking, and I'd start to make observations and then notice trends and begin to shift my thinking by letting go of that negative piece and opening up to a more positive piece. But more specifically, I would take time out and I would literally sit, by myself at times with a big old pad of paper, and I would just kind of let this open stream be written down. I would write out, all these different ways that I looked at life, the hopes, the dreams, all the negativities, and I would go back through that list and I would say, well, how can I shift my observation? How can I change my perspective to a more unlimited approach? And in fact, I would start to do it with things that I did want to create in my life. I would begin to write out, well, what are all the things I'd like to experience in life? What are the things that would, enhance my way of being, my understanding, my relationship with life itself? And I would actually write out some of those hopes, those dreams. And interestingly enough, I could come back to that same list a couple of days later, and I would be able to read that list, and I would notice just how many were very limited, that I could only achieve so much. Like, this little bit would seemingly make me happy. And I'd go back a couple of days later and it's like, wow, is that all I really can create? If I'm capable of unlimited potential, why would that be the most I think I could create? And certainly for those first few years, there was kind of an ongoing process of taking these really deep-rooted limitations, these things that were quite unempowering, these things that were quite, holding me back quite unconsciously. And I say unconsciously because I just wasn't aware. I wasn't aware of the potential there. And even, initially I could say, like writing my first book, my first thoughts were like, well, why would I write a book? Because I can't write. I mean, nothing in my schooling indicated that I was a good writer. I wasn't a bad writer, but I wasn't a good writer. Certainly not, worthy of being published, that somebody else would actually pick up my work and say this is good writing. Because I had no indication from my past that that was a truth. And yet, as I unfolded and found more courage and strength and affirmed more consistently my ability to at least explore it, and then by exploring it, to enhance it to, in fact, I never have taken in this entire process of writing 5 books, I've never taken a single writing course, ever. The only writing that I have comes from my original teachings in grade school and advanced college school in university. So, I've never actually sat down and with a so-called writer coach, lesson and said, this is how you write. I simply chose to write from my heart. I simply started to write from what I knew, from what I understood. And lo and behold, as I did more of that and gained more comfort and confidence in my potential, it didn't take very long. It was 6 weeks to write the first book. And it probably was less than 6 months, and I had a publisher. So one could say the power of positive affirmation, absolutely, I was affirming that this was all possible. Very different than when I first started out, where this wasn't even in my radar. This wasn't even in part of my recognition of a potential. But because I allowed myself to unfold naturally, I did so, I think, rather quickly. And the whole goal is to recognize whether you have to write it down. You know, if initially we have to put up little notes, that's very helpful. We can put up little sticky notes saying, I am an unlimited being. I'm capable of anything, you know, that I choose to put my attention upon. You know, some of those things, because what we're doing is we're trying to become more readily conscious of our potential. Given most of us, you know, depending on where we start this process, we can have quite a few years in our life stream before we actually start this process more consciously. So we have a lot of built up momentum. So the positive thinking process needs kind of a bit of a jump start up front to keep reminding us, oh yes, think more positively, think more unlimited. And I love that part about thinking unlimited, because positive thinking, the way I had read about it, the way I had understood it, really didn't tell me that it was about unlimited thinking, about removing limitations and exploring more of myself. And those are the very things that we can begin to place out there. We can even do simple recordings from our own voice and then listen to them. And you know, affirming ourselves in that way, taking time out to actually, you know, give ourselves hugs and give ourselves recognition, acceptance, that will stimulate and I would say rather exponentially move us into more and more positive direction quicker than any other thing, because that's that self-affirmation, that inner recognition that we are powerful, that we have great potential, and that we're here for wonderful purposes that only we can explore and find out and then share with the world. And of course, you know, we've also already somewhat given that away, that from my perspective, that I really think it's the love that we're here to express. But that's a few doorways down the road.
Well, in the meantime, this particular doorway leads to a big adventure, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And okay, it would be really interesting to see how the next one goes, the one about creativity, see how we can channel this potential we have.
And actually find out that we are very creative beings in everything we do.
Okay, thanks very much, Harold.
Pleasure.